you don't lose because your idea is wrong. You lose because you pitched it in a language that is yours and not somebody else's.
Welcome to yet another episode of Middle Manager Mastery with your host Shruti Rustagi. Today, the person I have with me has gone from banking floors to Uber boardrooms to digital health. Nishith Kumar, our guest today, has spent 20 years building the partnerships that move industries forward. He scaled ecosystems across fintech, mobility, and healthcare, and he knows what it takes to lead without a title in some of the world's most complex organizations. Today, as head of partnerships at NextHealth, he is writing the future of how healthcare connects. Get ready, this one's a totally packed episode. Welcome, Nishit, to Middle Manager Mastery.
Hey, how are you doing, Shruti?
Good, Nishit. All right, so let's get started without further ado. And like we talked about, I want to discuss a little bit about influencing without authority, right? And that's because when we think about middle managers, a lot of times these are the people who have to influence cross functionally. So, what I would want to ask you is if you were to think back to a cross functional initiative where you depended on a team whose priorities were not necessarily aligned to yours, right? You could think of a financial leader, regional leader, they didn't report into you, they didn't share your deadline. So, talk to us a little bit about how did you get them moving in your direction?
Yeah. Some of the things that, I've spent my entire career on biz dev, and some of the times we will actually see trends ahead of some other teams, and taking them to the team sometimes mean that they have no clue how is it relevant to them.
Mm,
And this was one situation that let me start with the example actually. At Uber, I was one of the first guys who started observing some trends on the connected cars side, whereby cars were starting to send data and you could actually read and write data, which was extremely valuable. But when I started talking about it internally, it wasn't actually speaking to any of the near term KPIs of the teams. And I was talking connected cars and I was not getting the required support from any of the teams internally, right? Classic case of where people are not aligned because it doesn't align with their regular KPIs. And in short, like everybody had kind of said no. They had enough reasons to say no. And things actually dramatically changed when I stopped talking about the feature and started talking about the future, right?
mm,
I went back to each of the teams and asked them, what does the future look like for you in 5 years from now? What are the biggest KPIs, biggest challenges that you are thinking about? And that framing kind of hit very differently. Suddenly, the product team was thinking about how we can get product lockouts. Engineering was thinking about competitive moats, not just like what's their sprint capacity like right now. And actually, safety and security was thinking about how it will help us reduce the costs. And
mm,
that is where suddenly the entire tables changed for us. And I had changed the cost of inaction, right? Right now, the cost of inaction was near term. And as soon as I started talking a different language and started talking the future and not the future, is when I would suddenly started getting alignment across the team. And basically, like, my observation is this, Shruti, right? Like in large matrix organizations, typically you don't lose because your idea is wrong. You lose because you pitched it in a language that is yours and not somebody else's. And that is what you
mm.
need to figure out, right? Each team has a lens. What makes them look good? What keeps them out of trouble? And what advances their roadmap? Are you actually talking that language or not? And if your pitch doesn't land on that lens, it will just not land. So the skill is actually more translation and
Mhm.
take the same idea, render it in a way that sounds like their native tongue. And that is a skill that all of us develop either over time or we just are naturally good at it. And that is typically what I would have done.
Very interesting. And I really like the way you phrased it, Nishit, which is don't sell a feature, sell the future. And then, of course, how do you translate it in their native tongue? So essentially, in other words, if I'm reading what you're saying correctly, it's like you understand what's keeping them up at night, you understand what their challenges are, what they care about, and then when you rephrase it and reframe it in that way, it becomes all the more easier. But now let's think about it a little bit, right? What if, and this could be a scenario too. I know what you said made sense. You were able to reposition it in such a way that it matched up to the future that they were thinking of as well. What if there comes a point where something needed to be more urgent you needed to escalate it. So almost think about you were buried in delivery, in your own targets, and you needed something to happen like really then and there. What about those kind of situations? And the little nuance that I want to bring in here as well is often people think of relationships only when it's like absolutely critical. So, how have you thought of relationships from a more longer term lens? So, let's understand both from you.
Yeah, I'll just talk about relationships to start with, right? Like, and maybe
Hmm.
we can tackle the question of escalation.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of not escalating soon enough at one
Okay.
time, and that hurt me. So I'll be happy to speak about that. But
Hmm.
I think like relationships, a lot of people assume that building relationships is different from work, right? It's
Hmm.
actually not. In my personal view, the best relationships happen when you are doing something together, when you're actually working, and there is just no conflict in those two things, building relationships and getting the desired outcomes. And typically, like, there are relationships, in my view, are built on three broad tenets. One is, are you a subject matter expert that somebody will reach out to, and
Hmm.
hence they want to be connected to you at all times, and they want understand that you actually add value.
Hmm.
Two, have you in the past done something for them before going and
Hmm.
asking for something, right? Extremely critical. Have you ever gone and prioritized something out of the way because the other team was in a similar scenario as you're in today? And finally, are you actually likable? Like, how are you presenting your thoughts? How are you bringing it together, right? And relationships are, whether at work or in your personal life, are all built on these three basic tenets, in my view. And I'll give you a classic example. And this is more in terms of how just relationships get work done. This is Christmas a couple of years back. We were very close to signatures, and last moment, we got the other team responding saying, hey, like, this needs to change in the legal agreement. And here
Hmm.
I'm literally standing in Disneyland with my kids, no laptop with me. I have no clue how do I get it done, right? Incidentally, my legal counterpart is actually traveling, and she's also unreachable. So I reach out to their manager, who I had previously worked with, had great relationships with, and this guy literally said, Nishith, you don't worry about it. I got this sorted. And he starts now speaking directly to their legal counterpart, gets that done on the Christmas day. And I'm literally like watching my daughter on a carousel, and I get a message saying, dude, it's done. Don't worry about it. So that was just an outcome of like what I had built over time. And it happened because
Hmm.
I had done the same thing, right? I had always consistently called out their work when they were doing a great job during some of the contracts. I would include them in all strategic conversations. I won't go to them with asks, but go to them presenting, how does this matter to the business? And that
Hmm.
gave them more inclusion at all times. And then they just started working with me on an ongoing basis in a way whereby it became more of a partnership than just an ask
Hmm.
based thing. So, like, relationships, in my view, like, are extremely, it shouldn't be considered as a weekend or an after hour activity. I think some of us are guilty of doing that, whereby we would just consider them something, hey, like, let's go out for drinks, and that builds relationships. Yes, that does. But effectively, like, I think that the KPI delivery is just in a large organization, it's kind of the relationships are kind of the infrastructure for it. If you have great relationships, you achieve KPIs together much faster, much better. And
Hmm.
somebody will burn out trying to do everything alone. But the moment you're starting to include everybody together, you see that they are motivated to actually go out and do it. So that's how I would typically do it, right? Like, that's my style of doing it in terms of relationships.
And I
But
like
there
the
are
three things you laid out there, which is like, how are you adding value? The give and take, the whole concept that Adam Grant talks about in a whole book. So, how are you giving before you're taking in that sense? And I really like the third thing that you said as well. Like, how many times have you gone out of your way to do something similar for them? As well as the piece about what you said at the end, that this is not just an after hour activity that may be building relationships too, but it is at work when you go out of your way, when you think of them as a partner. I remember something that I was just sharing with someone, that the way I would always go at it is like, how is it me and you versus an issue? Instead of going at it like it's me versus you. So it's not me versus the legal team, but it's both of us together. We have to tackle an issue for the broader organization. So,
absolutely. Another thing that I
yeah.
think is useful here, Shruti, is like relationships are also don't need to be the same level of depth across every single level,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you identify what depth of relationship you need to have? Some people just need to know you exist, but that
Hmm.
needs investment in time, right? Are you solving some problem for them? Are you attending some of their calls? Are you sending them updates once in a while? Are you actually asking them, hey, what can we do for you as a team? Right? So some relationships will be just, hey, I exist and I'm here to help. Some relationships will be, we are in it together. Let's do it day in, day out. We are probably exchanging more messages than I exchange with my wife. So like those kind of things will exist. So you have to also probably like identify what depth of relationships do you need at what level. And that will actually just help you a lot in terms of building relationships and getting teams to align and work with you in a way whereby it's beneficial for everyone.
Very true. And I sometimes think, at least thinking back on my own experience, Nishit, I just feel that a lot of this comes intuitively. Like, I never sit and think what are the relationships where I want to invest behind. But most of the times it's fairly intuitive, wherein I'll be like, yeah, for these people, I need to, like you said, these people need to know that I exist, at least so that when I want to bring up something, a proposal, an investment decision, anything, then at least there's that bit about, familiarity. Because the third thing you had said, you have to be likable. I think familiarity breeds likability in a big way. So,
Fantastically put, right? Familiarity absolutely breeds likability. If they don't know you, they have no reason to like you.
exactly, exactly. All right, yeah. And then let's go to escalation. You were sharing with us you have been guilty of not
Yeah,
escalating.
I have been, right? And let me break down escalations into two parts, right? There are two types
Hmm.
of escalations in my view.
Mhm.
I mean, go for the first one. There is sometimes when you need to escalate, when there is escalation in terms of the outcome is at risk, right?
Mhm.
And it could be that the partner is not moving fast enough or we are not getting what we want. And in such a situation whereby there is just cost of that the goals are at risk because we are not getting certain terms, as an example, or we are not moving in the direction that we are. And this is not on somebody else, this is on the overall project. In such a situation, I would escalate immediately, right? A lot of us are wary of escalating it to our managers or to leaders in the organization. I think that's a bad approach. And that's where I was actually guilty. I would always think, what would the senior management think about me if I go to them telling them, hey, this is not happening or I'm not being able to do it, right? There is absolutely no doubt in my mind. Escalate quickly, escalate absolutely like without any fear. Managers, your leaders want goals and outcomes, and they're not concerned about whether it's just you who is doing that. They are helping you there. I think they actually like people. I have seen people who actually just become very fond of people who are like, who escalate fast and ask for help. So that is
Yeah.
one form of escalation.
Mhm.
The other is the critical or the tricky one, right? Like whereby there is inaction on the part of a partner team,
Mhm.
and that is leading to potential risks to the business. There is a team who is supposed to be a critical part of the process, but is actually acting as a blocker, or they are just not moving fast enough, right? And this I've seen like fairly recently, whereby I was on a project whereby we had dependency on a GTM team,
Mhm.
and the process was fairly clear, written down. But in practice, when I went there, like I saw just inaction. Responses were not coming. People were not attending the required meetings without any reasoning. And like sometimes my team would assume that it's just bandwidth. But
Mm.
when I dove deeper into it, I realized it's just that it is not their core priority and it
Yeah.
just doesn't align there. So when I realized that, I try to also understand, is this common or is it just on this project? And when I realized that it's not a common pattern and this team is generally responding fast, this particular manager is particularly is responding fast, I just changed the way I approached the entire problem. I went to their leader
Mhm.
and gave them an alternative and told them what's at risk. So
Hmm.
instead of actually escalating the team, I escalated the dependency and tried to find an alternative. In this situation, we were lucky enough that we could find another resource and completely move the dependency from that team to ours and to somebody else. And this guy absolutely loved it, right? Their team was genuinely short on time. So typically, like, my golden words over there would be that you should just escalate for what the dependency is and not quite the team or the people. That is typically not my style. If there is escalation required on people, that should happen in your formal reviews, formal feedbacks that are happening, but not quite at the time of the project. It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like sometimes also like escalation is a very strong word in my view. Sometimes you just need a bridge, right?
Yeah.
A bridge could be, I know this person is just motivated. He's willing to work those extra hours to get idea about a particular new business or new idea that we are working on. And then like, how do you get them informally involved in the project? And slowly you start building progress. And in that
Mm.
time, you start getting the entire channel activated. So you could use bridges also sometimes if you feel that escalations, instead of just escalating, start with the bridge. And in the meantime, work with the manager or their managers to make sure that escalation really doesn't need to happen, or we are just getting the work done.
Yeah. I have found in my experience two other things that have been super helpful. So, one, like you talked about bridges, I totally agree. Like, you have to find somebody who almost I would call an ally or a champion on their side who you can use as a bridge. What I have also found, helpful is getting everybody on the table, not yet moving to the next level, and then just talking, getting curious, and saying, okay, just help me help you. Like, tell me what is it that's blocking us? If it's not a priority, how can I make it a priority? And then, I have
Absolutely.
found those to be helpful. Like, we recently had this very recent thing. Again, a go to market team for us as well. We call them GTM operations. So, GTMO team, they said, yeah, there's something we'll deliver by end of June. And they were not making any progress on it. And we were just asking them, okay, so what's happening? What's happening? Then eventually I realized that, okay, we need to bring everybody onto the table, and we got there. And then they were like, okay, listen, we don't even know where to get some of these things from. How do we build out the whole thing for you? And I was like, okay, so this is what you should have raised. That's where I will come and help you. So we got together all our six stakeholders, all the partner teams all together, and then it became much easier for them to dedicate resources to say, because sometimes it's just lack of clarity. Everybody has so much going on their plate. So they're like, oh, this, I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. And that later never comes. So I think
Yeah.
forcing functions that help them get clarity, get them onto the table, I think also help. Could be another one along with the bridges.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more on that one.
So, yeah, interesting. So, we talked about escalation relationships. Let's now move to a different kind of influence, Nishit. This is when, and I have been on the receiving end of this a lot of times because most of my life has been spent in finance, and finance never makes the strategy. But we are definitely expected to review, to understand, to then say, why is this not working, to be the controllers, so to speak, right? How do you, and I think this holds true even for middle managers who are themselves not creating strategies. So when we think about such a situation, right, can you tell us from your own experience or people you have managed that you were handed down a strategy and you had real reservations about it, even, about executing it, but the key part is we always say to middle managers, don't be a task runner, don't just be an executor. So, how do you really become a partner? So, if I were to put it differently, when a strategy is handed down to you as a middle manager, what do you do so that you don't become invisible and just a task executor?
Yeah, such a common problem, right? Like strategy typically is written at 30,000 feet. And a lot of the times those teams don't have on ground reality that when the strategy is being formed, right? And that's where technically your value lives. You see it as a challenge, I see it as an opportunity, right? How can you become the translation layer between the strategy or the intent and the actual reality is where I think people should start building skills. A lot of it comes with experience. A lot of it can come by being focused about asking the right questions when the strategy comes to you, right? The easiest way to do it is there are two scenarios. One whereby you will just have to start executing. In
Mm-hmm.
that scenario, my strategy is to ask some questions upfront, right? What's the core outcome that this is trying to achieve? Do you understand the core outcome required? What are the riskiest assumptions in this? And finally, what would I do differently if I had to write the strategy myself? And even if your answers don't change the strategy, they will just sharpen the execution, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
one way to go about it. The
Mm-hmm.
second is when there is just a major rift between what the original strategy wanted to do and what is actually the ground reality. I'll give you a classic example, right? A lot of the times what will happen is we decided that these are the kind of payment partnerships we want to sign across different markets. And this was written sitting in the US when they did not have real idea about what transactions are happening on the ground in a particular market. Somebody saying, hey, let's move
Of the
card
US.
outside of the US, right? This is a time when India was moving to wallets, when India was talking about UPI, and people here were still talking about let's get them to digital payments. Yes, digital payments is the right idea, but the mode of digital payments is very different in a certain market, right? So the playbooks that were written for the success of this particular project didn't quite apply to some of these markets, right? India was
Hmm.
a classic example over there. So in such a situation, I think you need to clearly map out what exists
Hmm.
across different markets, find out the common elements, find out what's different across each, and present that as true risks, the restructuring required, and be very
Hmm.
open about it. And the sooner you do it, the better it is, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, because otherwise, what will happen is you will get into the execution and you would be set up to fail because the strategy didn't talk to the ground realities. So,
That
how
is true.
fast can you just get those market realities and present it soon enough? I think will be really, really important in such a scenario. And you should be fairly bold sometimes to go out and express that. But that doesn't mean sometimes you will just have to execute without questioning, right? You should disagree, but commit, right?
Yeah.
That is still required. So it's not quite that easy, I would say. But unless you have execution insight, that hypothesis may not hold true. And hence,
Hmm.
in my view, you should go in, do the groundwork as soon as possible before you start executing so that you can bring up the challenges earlier versus waiting to actually face failure.
That is very well put, Nishit. And, as you were saying this, of course, we all have so many stories in our lives, right? I was reflecting on something and I felt there's another parallel to it that I would want to draw. And that is sometimes you need to go back and question the real intent behind the strategy.
That's
So,
true.
if the real intent of the strategy is just so that we can ensure a way of better payments or trackable payments or something like that, I don't know whatever that real intent was in the digitization, then you can flip it around and say, well, my success metrics won't be the same as yours or to a leader, let's say, but the intent will still be done. And that will be done by exactly what you're saying, like knowing the ground realities, then translating the strategy to that ground realities. That makes a lot of sense. And oftentimes, I think people don't spend enough time, like you said, in understanding the ground realities and marrying the two, marrying the strategy, understanding the intent, and then marrying it back to what do we want to achieve. Which I think in your case, when you guys were doing the digital payments, you really understood that the idea was just however they need to be executed, making sure you're taking the ground reality of India and then executing it that way.
That is
So,
so true.
yeah.
In fact, like I think like from what you're saying, the other way around is also very true. How do you make sure sometimes you might not be executing, it might be your teams, it could be other cross-functional teams.
Hmm.
How do you make sure that they understand the strategy, right?
That is so
Sometimes the
true.
core intent of strategy is not understood by people on the floor. And in some of the organizations, the great leaders that I have seen actually spend time on repeating the strategy, not once, not twice, not thrice. They are not wary of repeating the same thing to different layers of people so that they understand what is their contribution and how does it actually match up to the entire business objective. So I think like as much as bringing the operational realities grounds up is required, the other way around is extremely important as well because not all of us see the future or the company from the same lens that sometimes this strategic leadership is thinking looking at.
Yeah, that is so true. So I totally agree. Leaders also need to spend that time in translating that strategy, in helping people understand the why behind the strategy, if you will. Right? Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Let's move to a slightly different situation. So these are the cases, what we talked about, Nishit, is when we broadly are aligned, but the market realities could be different, and so we are translating it differently. If we are fundamentally not in alignment with the direction itself, how do you propose people should take up dissent? Like, how do you disagree? And especially, and Amazon has this whole LP, which we call have backbone and then disagree and commit, right? I would love to get your take on how do you disagree and commit?
Yeah, sometimes like dissent not done properly can be a career limiting move. CLMs, as they are a lot of times called. I think this requires a lot of maturity. There is always a right room, the right language, and the right time for dissent, right? And figuring that out is extremely important. You get any of those rooms, you go from being a valued critic to actually just being a cause of friction. And you don't want to be assumed as the latter, right? So, in my view, like it's a chronological rule, in my view. Like you
Okay.
have to dissent before the decision, not after the decision, right? Once a decision is taken and you are in the room where that decision is being taken, you can't go back and question it after it's been decided, right? So first of all, like just decide. You should dissent at the time when the decision is being formed. Decisions don't happen like in large organizations. Decisions don't happen overnight. Typically, you would know what's happening once the strategy has been committed to publicly, right, or across teams. Just the cost of reversing it is enormous, in my view. The amount of time spent by the leadership is sometimes enormous. And you're no longer giving feedback, you're just creating friction. Having said that, there'll be time. How do you express this? Like, first of all, it's a lot about the language as well, right? Minor things, but the moment you start with the worst thing to say in case you have to dissent is to say, I disagree, right? You may disagree, but the moment you said that, you have framed yourself as somebody who is interrogating them versus interrogating the problem. The frame that I typically use, Shruti, in such a scenario is I want to stress test this assumption. It's not about pushing back on somebody's thoughts, somebody's ideas. It's about, are you actually adding rigor to it? Have you thought about it enough? And those are the kind of languages that will typically help people actually value your dissent or your feedback versus just questioning it, right? Many examples, right? Like 20 years now. So it's just like crazy number of examples when I just completely disagreed with, or I would say, did not like the approach taken by a certain team or a certain individual, right? A good example that I'll take is that in one of my earlier jobs, the go-to market strategy was based on what the partners would actually want from the relationship with our company, right? And the assumption was formed on the basis of conversations, but was formed on the basis of conversations at the highest levels. But when the people who were actually going to execute it on a daily basis knew the operational risks there, right? The operators had a completely different set of concerns that the strategy and the senior management did not address and did not think about. And my approach was like, let me take this first one-on-one versus in a large group. Sometimes that is also important. So before it was decided and written down and the execution steps were formed, I actually went one-on-one in a meeting and I said, I wanted to just share some ground level data with you based on the conversations that we have been having, that our teams have been having, who are daily in rooms with these partners. And it did not change the strategy. It just made sure that we address some of these concerns, which would have potentially led to failure, right? So I think like that is one way to look at it. Also, I would say like organizationally, you have to be very cautious about how safe is it to raise directly and versus just like there are some organizations whereby you need to accept and move on, right? Even in those scenarios, I think it's important for you to at least document what your observations are, right? Here is the suggested data. This is the risk that I foresee. And here is the suggested mitigation. You go with a problem or are you going with the solution in such an organization will make such a big difference to how you're being perceived at in that room. So I would say that like, don't stay silent, but don't even worry about how dissent will land, right? If you don't agree with something, then don't argue, but present facts, present data, present realities, present examples. And that will really get you to the point that you want to be at.
I loved all of those, Nishit. I especially like don't start with I disagree,
Yeah,
but
of
rather say
course.
I want to stress test.
Oh,
That is brilliant. That is just brilliant. And then because I was reflecting that how many times, at least by one person, I have heard this. And now when you said that, I was like, oh yes. And I never even once considered that as,
it was
she was
planned.
disagreeing.
She just was disagreeing. You
She
just didn't
did,
know it.
and she did it so well.
Yeah, amazing. You should connect
Yes.
me to that person.
Yes.
It's an organizational skill, right? Like in large organizations that succeed, allowing for people to be able to present their views and not take everything as is. Um, I think that keeps organizations very entrepreneurial internally, right? So, and isn't it what you say in Amazon? It's still day one, right?
Yes.
Like that's day one because you still are able to question what is coming to you and make sure that you're making it better versus just accepting this is how things go and going on with that.
Absolutely. And that makes such a huge difference because I have been on the receiving end of it, Nishit. So I could totally relate to the moment you said I want to stress test the assumptions because it reframes it so well. Then I'm with her. We are like rethinking about the whole strategy, we are rebuilding it.
Absolutely.
It's a very different thing. So I love that. And I also love the other two pieces you said. One on ones, because I like to call that like pre wiring. So always do the pre wiring with the data, with the facts, like you said about the ground realities which you shared with that person. I think that makes a lot of sense too. And also, I think, yeah, always go with facts, like make it data driven. It's not like I'm not against you. We're just trying to make it better. And if you go with that attitude, you stay open to whatever comes from their side as well. So I like that. This is a great way. And like you said, the right rooms, the right people, the right time. And yeah, I really like the way. So the descent is one thing that you have to be a little bit strategic about. And
I just feel that like a lot of times we should be very cognizant about making the other person look good versus
hmm,
making them look bad, right? Like how
yes,
you express it, where you express it can sometimes make them look bad, even if you are like dramatically right and you can just prove the other person's assumptions being wrong. It is just a bad strategy. It goes back to everything that we have discussed thus far. It's the easiest way to spoil
yeah,
relationships, make them look
yeah.
bad, right? How do you make them look good is what will get everybody to the desired outcomes at the end of it.
Yeah, that's so true. And make them look good, that automatically makes them feel good about the relationship too and about everything that you're working on together. Completely agree. I'm cognizant we have just about 10 minutes. So let me ask you one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
Sounds great.
Um, how would you deal with situations, and this is happening a lot more now, Nishit, when there is not more resources, we can't throw people on something, we don't have enough time, everybody is hard pressed for both resources and time. So talk to us about maybe one of the most toughest situations that you have faced where you had to keep like these multiple cross functional teams accountable in a tight timeline, low resource situation. And what I would be really interested in is your learnings, how you did it, and then what did you learn from it to take it from for future.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll just refrain from the example because this one's the one that I was thinking about as soon as you started speaking about it is a bit confidential, but I'll tell you the learnings
Yeah,
out of it,
that's fine.
right?
Whatever
What's
you
the easiest solution as soon as you start facing resource? I think like resource scarcity is really kind of a trend right now, I would say, but it's more of a clarity tool than just being scarcity, right? Like, how do you make sure that you are doing the right things? You're figuring out what actually matters is kind
hmm
of where I see some of the current organizations moving to,
hmm
and which is a good thing in my view over a longer run. Typically, whenever you are put under pressure and there is accountability in terms of time and there is resource scarcity, the easiest thing to do is let's add more meetings, let's add more
hmm
check ins, let's add more people. That, in my view, just is absolutely wrong, right? More
hmm
processes in a resource constrained situation just adds overhead. And it is
hmm
important to actually take overheads away sometimes. And you actually need just radical simplification of what needs to be done and who owns it. And that's where I have spent a lot of the time. Right? So let me think about like what I would do. In such a situation, I would once start working on single artifacts versus multiple documents. Right? We are so
Okay.
overloaded with documents today. Different pieces live in so many different documents and try to put things together, and there'll be conflicts that arise. Could you have a living document that everybody is reading and writing into, as an
Hmm.
example, that everybody can get all the updates from versus having to read 5 different emails, as an example? Will that just save time? The short answer is yes. The other thing that I would do is that more than deadlines, talk about true milestones. What's a good example for it? A good example would be, hey, this was done by Friday, versus saying the document is signed and it is now added in Slack, right? the more specific you are, the more milestone driven you are, and not just deadline driven, what are the specific milestones that you have set will really help you achieve a lot of better results in spite of there being resource constraints. And finally, just make sure that if you are coordinating that project, are you helping unblock something that's taking time for others, that's making them further resource constrained? This is something that I learned from one of my earliest managers. He would just ask us for three things every week. He'd say, can you send me your top three progress, top three problems, and top three priorities? Full stop. And he would just get actively into solving the problems so that they are unblocking us. So I think as a manager, the more you are seen as somebody who is helping unblock and release time, release resources for people, the more you will be valued. Accountability will not come just because you have authority. It comes from clarity. It comes from visibility. It comes from the belief that someone is just removing the obstacles behind your back also. So that's what typically I would approach it with. I think this resource scarcity is going to stay for a long time. So people need to get used to this approach.
We agree. I really like. So one, I'm gonna take away those three things for sure, like three priorities, three places where you're making progress, and three where you need support. Right? That's what you said. I think that's great, and that goes back to the escalation piece that we were discussing too, Nishit. That one of the biggest roles of a manager is to help unblock their team, and so that's why escalations are so important. But going back to what you were saying, another thing that landed really well with me was when you said that instead of deadlines, have milestones. So if I were to poke that a little bit, what you're saying is, let's say, getting the document signed is a milestone. And then that could have a deadline attached to it or not, but the key is that that's one of the things we
Milestones
need
that
to
you have.
get done. It's a milestone that you need to achieve for an end result to happen. And that makes a lot of sense that even if you have or you don't have deadlines, having the milestones is actually the critical part. What will be the blockers on the way to reaching that end goal? I love that. And oftentimes, when we build our work back plans, as we like to call it, people miss the whole idea as to what is it that they want to achieve on the different deadlines. Like having the milestones very clear and, like you said, bring more clarity, I think is a very good thing. One thing which I do want to reiterate for everybody to listen, because for me that was a very nice reframe. When you said that think about resource constraint as a forcing function of clarity. I think something
Absolutely.
to that effect. I love that. That's really cool. Okay, so as we wrap up, Nishit, one last thing that you definitely want folks to take away, and I know you've had like so many nuggets of wisdom, but if there was one thing you want folks to take away.
I think one of the things that we have to change is our overall approach to people, right? A lot of the times we assume that people are there to block you. I think people are there to succeed together. And the moment you start thinking like that, you will be able to form relationships. Escalations will not really be required. People will be willing to help you out, right? So go into the room assuming that all of the people around you, and especially in matrix organizations, in cross functional work setups, which a lot of us are working in, just assume that they are there to achieve the same goal. At the end of it, every time the company does well, they do well. And the moment you go with that approach, you will see that you will flourish better within teams. You will just form better relationships. You will get better outcomes.
Love it. Thank you so much, Nishit, for your time and sharing all of those amazing examples and learnings from it. Thank you.
Of course, I loved speaking about it. Thank you, Shruti. I hope this helps.
Absolutely.